Hello there, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Princeton Review and Tutor.com's AP English webinar. I know people are still trickling in and probably will be for these first few minutes or so. So once more, thank you for being here. My name is Ken Brenner. I'm an AP English Lang and Lit tutor and instructor for Princeton Review. And then we are joined by Anna Richmond, who is our customer success specialist for both Tutor.com and Princeton Review. And she will be helping out with questions that pop up in the chat that I may not see as I'm presenting. And sort of just keeping us organized and on pace as we go through the presentation. If you have a question, the best place to ask that question is in the public chat. And this kind of prevents people from having to come on mic if they don't want to, but it also just makes sure that we can address that question at like an organic moment in the presentation. Lastly, this presentation is being recorded. So I just want to make everyone aware of that in terms of future viewing and anything associated with that idea. Since we've got a good number here already, we'll get started, and people, like I said, will trickle in throughout the course of the next few minutes. So you know that you are here tonight, as we said, for an AP English webinar. And as your guide through this presentation, we're going to cover three main areas. We're going to talk about why somebody would take the AP exams. We're going to talk about the format and structure of the main two AP English exams, language and literature. And then we're going to talk about what strategies we can offer as a test prep company that could give you an edge in preparing, and sort of just have you think about what parts of the exam do I need to prepare for, especially. As you'll see, these exams go beyond just having a good grasp of the English language or of English literature, as you'll see as we go through the strategy piece in that third segment. So let's dive right into things with that first segment. Why take AP exams at all? The critical part of that answer is when we ask about what the best thing about these exams are. The fact is, and the main reason people take them, is you can earn college credit. Basically, the general barometer is that most colleges in the country will give students a credit for a score of 3 out of 5 or higher. Now, there are some colleges who have stricter standards and might only give credit on a 4 or higher. But for a large portion of schools, 3 is the score you need. A second reason is these can work as credit for required courses. So what that means is that if I take an AP English course, that can count as a core English class. And no matter what major you're going to go into, most colleges are going to require you to do 2 core courses of English. Even if you're going to college for medicine or you want to be a political science major. Well, taking the AP courses gets that out of the way. And what that means is you're allowed to skip some of those introductory classes. And by skipping those core classes, because you've earned some credits from APs, you are going to be getting to your major faster. So let's say I was going to college for political science, or art history, or biology. What I really want to do is explore all the aspects of that field so I can get the experience I need to work in that field one day. Well, the more of these introductory core classes you can skip because of AP credits, the faster you get to do what you're going to find most interesting. Additionally, you might be able to graduate sooner. And while we're not asking anyone to give up any of their college experience, the fact is that graduating sooner means you get to work in your field more quickly. It may even reduce the amount of debt you have to incur. So there's a lot of benefits here that are all kind of connected together with taking AP exams at all. So if you're going to take them, you have to know when you're offered. And the English exams this year are each offered on a Wednesday. In 2025, you have exactly one chance to do the literature exam. That is on Wednesday, May 7th. And you have one chance to do the language exam. That is on Wednesday, May 14th. So make sure that you are positioned to take these exams. Understand that makeups are only given in very, very specific circumstances. So the idea is you'll be taking the exams on this day and this day only. Now, before we get too into the differences between Lang and Lit, we mentioned before that you want to score a 3 or higher. Well, let's kind of look at how the College Board and colleges view those results. Basically, what we're saying if we score a 3 is College Board is saying to colleges that this student is qualified in this subject area. They have shown enough competency in this subject area that they know the subject. And you can see it would be like getting a B minus or a C plus or a C in college. So it's not the best grade, but it's certainly enough grade to keep things moving forward. It doesn't raise any alarms. It means you understood the material well enough. Earning a 4, College Board is telling colleges this person is very well qualified in this area to earn credit and skip course in your college program. You can see that's an A minus, B plus, or a B. And then a 5, which is effectively a perfect score, is extremely well qualified. It's an A plus or an A. So the higher your score on an AP exam, the easier it is for a college to say, yes, we're going to give you credit for this course and you're going to be able to skip it. And certainly, it also plays well from a college admission standpoint if I can earn high scores on these exams, because it's a separate metric from GPA, where colleges can say, wow, I can see this student's academic proficiency in some way besides GPA. And GPAs can be a little bit murky to untangle. So this is a really nice tool if I can earn a solid score. And then, of course, you can see what the scores of 2 and 1 are. And that's basically saying, we just don't have the competency required in this subject. It doesn't mean you're bad in the subject. It only means that on that day, the exam posed a challenge for you in that area. Now, our second segment is going to be understanding what makes Lang different from Lit and what features the 2 exams share. But if you have any questions on any of our first few slides here, feel free to type a question in the chat, and both Anna and I are monitoring that. So I'll give a moment here to see if any questions pop up, because it can take a moment to type them. See anything popping in yet, but I'm sure there we'll both keep an eye on it, so we won't miss you if you ask one about what we just covered. So let's talk about understanding these 2 exams. We already talked about why AP exams are a good thing and why people take them, but let's see what they're supposed to measure. What AP exams are supposed to measure, according to College Board, the company who makes them, is for a student to show competency in the material covered by an introductory college course in the exam subject. So if someone earns like a 4 or a 5 on AP Calc AB, they're basically saying that if you were to take a introductory college calculus course, you would get like an A minus, a B plus, or a B in it. That's effectively what it's showing. And so, while these things don't always measure up, and a college course could be harder than doing the AP exam, for the schools that choose to use APs, which is colleges that use APs, which is most of them, they're kind of accepting that, were you to go through the course, that's about the grade you would get. So there's no need to put you through the course. So that's why these exams are around. We'll start off by talking about English lang. And you should know that College Board always has some major themes or ideas that these exams cover. So, one of the things that AP English lang covers is rhetorical situation. And questions or essays about rhetorical situations are about how an argument was constructed to accomplish a goal or convey an idea. Rhetoric is always dealing with how someone built their argument and how they attempted to persuade someone else. Claims and evidence is understanding what argument was made and what evidence was used to support this argument. And you're going to need to separate what the argument was from the factual data that was used to support that argument. Reasoning and organization is about understanding how a text was organized. How did the author move from one idea to the next? What was the flow of ideas? Why did the author choose to include something at one particular moment in the story? And finally, style is all about writing style. Why was something delivered in a more familiar tone? Why was something done very formally? What literary devices were used in these moments to in some way advance the author's argument? So English lang is all very much about how writing is organized and how the author accomplishes their goals. This is very different from the big ideas on AP English Lit. English Lit's big ideas are things that you almost would see more in a book report. So, who are the characters in the story and how were they developed? What is the setting of the story and what role did it have in the story's action? What is the structure of the story? What was the chronological events that sort of move the narrative along? Who was the narrator? What was their point of view? Were they a character in the story? Were they omniscient? What was their role? What figurative language was used in the story? How did the author use different levels of description to help the reader understand what was going on in the setting and the plot and the structure? And finally, we have in the essays, literary argumentation, which is the one thing that's kind of like AP English lang a little bit, which is literally what were the goals that the author wanted to accomplish in the story? Or are you able to argue some viewpoint using examples from literature? That's really the bigger one, is what I just said. So you can see that while these both might be English tests, they evolve very, very different aspects of English. One of them is how language is used to make an argument. Another one is how language is used to craft a narrative. Does anyone have any questions about the big differences between these two exams? I'm not seeing anything pop up, but Anna, definitely let me know if I missed something. So again, they do share some things in common, and one of them is their overall exam structure. When you encounter your AP exam a few months from now, whether it's Lang or Lit, you're going to be confronted with a section 1 where you are given 60 minutes and it costs 45% of your grade. Now in Lang, you're going to get 55 multiple choice questions, and some of them are going to be based on a passage, whereas others are going to be based on smaller excerpts. In literature, you get 45 multiple choice questions, and they are all based on passages. And in literature, 2 of those passages will be prose, so like non-rhyming fiction, like Catcher in the Rye and Great Gatsby and all of those. 2 of them will be poems, and one of them may be a third poem or prose, or could be informational. So do expect that 2 of your literature excerpts will come from regular written works, 2 of them will come from poem, and the 5th one can be a little bit of a grab bag. So literature is all passage based. Lang is mostly passage based, and then some like individual, single paragraph situation based questions. They also each have a section 2, and that section 2 is 55% of the grade. But their section 2s differ from that point. Languages section 2 is 135 minutes, and 15 of those minutes is a suggested reading period, though you could spend it however you want. In this time, what you need to read is the things for your synthesis essay and your rhetorical analysis essay. Your synthesis essay is like a DBQ in history. You're going to be given a few small excerpts of literature, and you're going to need to group them and combine them in some way to address an argument or a point. In rhetorical analysis, you are going to be given a written passage. You're going to need to analyze how the argument of the passage was built and the main lines of reasoning used within it. An argument essay is kind of more like a standard essay you guys have written, where you're just going to be given a prompt and you'll write an essay in response to that prompt, making some type of argument. For literature, there is no reading period because you don't have all those different sources like synthesis does. You just get 2 hours. You get 1 poetry analysis essay, which is like doing rhetorical analysis on a poem. You have a prose fiction analysis essay, which is doing rhetorical analysis on a piece of fiction. And then you have a literary argument, which is, again, a prompt where you're making an argument, but you are using excerpts. You're using your own knowledge of examples from English literature. So you can see that these 2 have definitely different tasks, but they also share some DNA in that the sections are each worth the same percents of your grade, and the timing on the sections is similar. One very big note here in the bottom left, one of the very recent announcements that came out, just came out before the new year basically, was that this year, AP Lang and AP Lit will only have 4 possible answers on multiple choice rather than 5. That's great news. That is 1 less tricky answer that you need to, deal with. Our presentation today has 5 answers. So as easy as I try to make things today, they're going to be easier for you on the official exam, having only 4 answers present. I just want to make sure everyone makes note of that you're only going to be dealing with 4 answer choices. So before we get into our 3rd segment, now we're moving right along, but our 3rd segment is a bit longer. Are there any questions on the material so far? Anything at all if people want to ask about the basic structure of the 2 exams?
We do have one question. Could you explain the components of the argument essay?
Sure. Is this although the literary argument essay for AP Lit?
There's not a clarification, but I would assume so.
Yeah, perfect. So in the I can give you sort of an example of this, but the literary argument essay is going to go something like this. You're going to get a prompt that says, many works of literature feature characters who accept or reject a hierarchical structure. This hierarchy may be social, economic, political, or familial, or it may apply to some other kind of structure. And effectively, you're going to be asked to choose a work of fiction in which a character interacts with some type of hierarchical structure, and you're going to have to analyze the character's response to the hierarchy. So effectively, on these questions, you're going to be given a claim or an argument, and you're going to be asked to choose a literary example from your own memory to craft a response to that question, to that argument. So what you're going to need to do is respond to the prompt with an argument, something that can actually be defended, give evidence that from literature that supports your argument, explain how that evidence supports your argument, and make sure your grammar and punctuation are up to snuff. So basically, you're going to need to craft an argument about a topic given to you, and you're going to need to use an example from literature to do it. Does that answer your question, Aldo?
Yes, we're all set.
Perfect. Just making sure. And I do have some slides coming up, a little bit more about the essays, so I'll make sure to circle back to that when it comes up. So when you are going into these exams, a very important thing that everyone needs to realize is that both of these exams are effectively standardized tests. And what I mean by that is, although they are AP exams, these exams in particular don't test you on an overwhelming amount of content. Now, let me be clear, especially for Lang, you do need to know literary devices. Like, you certainly need to go into the exam knowing what analogies and metaphors and similes and juxtaposition are. But for the most part, you aren't being tested on the deepest aspects of AP language, and you're definitely not being tested on actual literature knowledge. For instance, you don't actually need to know the plot of any literature work to do well on the AP Lit test. You just need to have a few that you can pull in examples from for the essay Aldo just asked about. When we say something is a standardized test, that means that the test is deliverable to all students who took AP Lit, regardless of what works were covered and regardless of how well their instructor did and how much content they got through. That means that everything needs to be generalized. And it means that when you're asked questions, you may not know the answer to the question, but you're going to know enough to eliminate the wrong answers. You don't want to go into this exam assuming it's a content exam where you need to have studied some specific work. Instead, you want to get questions right by eliminating what's wrong. If I ask you a content question, what is the capital of Malawi? Unless you happen to have learned that and you remember it, you would never get the question right. But if I show you 4 answers, as you'll see on your exams, you probably know that it is not Paris, London, or Amsterdam. And therefore, the answer is going to be Lilongwe. That is an example of the process of elimination. You did not know that the answer was Lilongwe. You simply knew that it wasn't the other 3. So as you take this exam, you want to physically eliminate the 3 flawed answers in each question. And generally speaking, the harder the question is, the better it is to get it through process of elimination, and the less likely someone would just know it off the top of their head, especially on these 2 exams where things are based on a passage and not outside knowledge. This is a very powerful tool for multiple choice. Another powerful tool is this. You do not need all the multiple choice questions correct in order to get a high score. If you come across a question that stumps you, you're going to want to put in a guess and move on. But there is a right way to guess on a standardized exam. You see, if you look here, whoops, sorry. I'll fill this in on my own. If you look at what you have going on here, and where you see it says scores higher, scores lower, let me show you what I mean by this. Perfect. If I guess write down a column, where I'm choosing the same letter for every problem I don't know, that's actually going to score higher than guessing randomly. And there are two reasons for that. One, on a standardized test like the AP exam, College Board uses each answer roughly the same number of times. So by putting in the same letter every time, you have slightly better odds that a few of your random guesses will be right. It's possible if you make random guesses on the right here that all your random guesses could be wrong. But the real reason we recommend letter of the day is for pacing. And what I mean by that is whenever you have a question where you aren't really sure of what the answer is, the last thing you want to do is give up part of your valuable hour trying to randomly guess. By throwing in a letter of the day, you preserve the clock. And we've seen many instances of someone falling very short of all 45 lit problems and still effectively getting a quote unquote perfect score on the multiple choice portion. On some exams, students have missed as many as 6 or 7 questions and still gotten, like the full 50%, so to speak. So the full 45%. So just be aware that you never let one problem destroy your clock, and choosing a letter of the day, A, B, C, D, before the exam starts is the fastest way to not waste time on a problem you shouldn't really be doing. Now, let's go ahead and clear all these drawings and let's start to examine what we would do on these problems. And so here, what you are looking at is you are looking at a question that would show up, that would show up on AP English Lang, but I want to be clear, what we're teaching works on both exams. So here's what I have. Question 1 says, or the question here says, the term taxa in paragraph 1 refers to. Notice I'm starting with the question rather than the paragraph. I'm not interested in reading the paragraph yet because I need to know what I'm looking for before I read. I want to actively find what is said about taxa before I just randomly read everything. So I'm not reading this paragraph to read every word. I'm reading it to know what it says about taxa. Now I see taxa in line 5. And what I see around that is that emphasis species for which habitat may be monitored may come from a wide spectrum of conservation categories, from taxa listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act to ubiquitous species that may be hunted or trapped. So apparently, right, what causes a species to be monitored has to do with these conservation categories from something listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act. Well, everything I'm talking about here, right, is then talking about species and categorization. And so when I go to look at these answers, I know that the right answer has to do something with the categorization of species. So I look at these options, right? And I have A, characteristics of a group of organisms that distinguish them from other groups. The problem here is, and again, it may be tricky to see, the problem here is it isn't saying that these taxa is something that makes one group different than another. It is just a categorization method. So we're not going to go with choice A. I don't want to read in beyond what I have. Criteria used to determine whether a species is endangered. They are taking the word endangered and they're reusing it. But this doesn't say that it's used to determine what's endangered. It's used to determine whether something should be monitored or not. So C, a grouping of certain species of organism. We said from our clue that taxon just has to deal with categorizations of species. D, the unusually frail members of a large group of animals who likely would not survive without habitat support. I have no idea from the little I read here that this has anything to do with frail members of a group. And E, any group of widespread and thriving organisms. All I know here is that taxa is something to do with categorizing species. I don't know that it applies to any group of widespread and thriving organism because these taxa are listed under this Federal Endangered Species Act. What you're seeing here is not a deep understanding of these sentences, but rather just a use of the process of elimination. And I'm going to just underline, right, the issues with each of these things. Yes, they use them to categorize, but I don't know that it's specifically to say this is how they're different from other groups. It isn't say that this is how we determine they're endangered, just this is how we might categorize them. Nothing about unusually frail. And the sentence doesn't indicate that any group of widespread and thriving organisms would be taxa listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act. It's probably species that might not be doing well. So each one of these answers has a thing that eliminates it. But the key thing here is to understand that you aren't being asked to understand this whole paragraph. You're looking to be asked what's specifically said about one term. Okay, so what you just saw is something that we call active reading. When you do read a paragraph, you're not looking for all the details. You want to find the author's main point. You want to understand how it connects to what came before it, and you want to understand where it is likely to lead next. When you are asked these questions, you're going to frequently be asked about the purpose or the main idea, much more than you're going to be asked about hyper-specific details. So an active reader learns how the passage is structured. A passive reader reads every word and treats them as important. And that is what gets people into trouble on the Lang and the Lit exams. So when you are reading the passage, it's really important that, you, as I said, you don't read every word up front. When you start an AP Lang or Lit passage, you are going to quickly move through each paragraph, doing the three things that I said. What's the main point? How does it connect to the previous paragraph? And where is it likely to go? So I don't understand every word yet. I just have a very rough map of where everything's located. Once you finish the passage, you ask yourself, what was the main point the author made? And what was the goal the author had in talking about that point? Was that goal to convince me? Was it to just be interesting or entertaining? Was it actually supposed to make me disagree? And finally, what impact would the passage have on readers who lived when it was written? And what techniques did the author use? These are not things you spend time writing about because you don't have that time on a multiple choice area. These are quick questions you ask yourself because many of the questions on Lang and also Lit are going to be about these big picture purposes. If you can identify the overall purpose, you've likely got the answer to any question about purpose, even if that's just about one paragraph. So understand that on these tests, every question is giving you a very specific task. Make sure you read that question stem carefully and know what hyper-specific thing you're asked to do. Whenever you are given lines to go back and reread them, because the first time you looked at them, remember, You only glazed over them briefly to get a main idea. So now you should reread those lines exactly, as well as a few lines before and after. Many times, the explanation of why something was in sentence A is in the sentence after that, not sentence A itself. So we need that context. To apply POE on your own, start by eliminating the answers that you know to directly contradict or were simply not mentioned in the lines you read. Then look for the right answer within the remaining choices. And I'm going to sort of add to that. What you're trying to do is looking for the answer that's supported. And you might assume that if you're down to two, the best way to find the right answer is to ask which answer is trying to trap you. The right answer will be well supported, but phrased differently from the passage. The wrong answer might look like the passage, but it won't be supported. And that is something that we will talk about. So, in these multiple choice questions, we've already talked about how you should use POE to eliminate the three flawed answers. We've explained that you should put in a pre-chosen letter of the day every time you're going to guess. Let's talk briefly about this last thing, the two-pass system. For each section one, whether it's lang or lit, you should do the passages in two passes. For each passage, you should answer the easy questions and put in a random guess for the hard ones. And then, if you have time left in that passage, you should go back and do as many of the hard ones as you can. So let me give an example of this. For AP Lit, you have 5 passages in an hour. It means you have 12 minutes per passage. In those 12 minutes, you should jump around in one passage and do all the easies. Everything that's hard, throw in the letter A. Once you've seen all the questions in that passage, then you're going to return to everything you lettered, and now you're going to try to actually do the problem and update your answer. The reason you want to put a letter of the day the first time is twofold. One, you know the problems with your letter of the day are the one you have to go back to. You can mark them or circle them if you're doing it in a book physically. Two, if you do run out of time, you've at least put in a response for all questions in that passage. This system produces higher scores than just doing all of the questions in a passage in order. So let's keep rolling. Now, here is a sample reading passage. I just want to keep a little bit of an eye on the clock because I do want to talk about the essays also. What you see here, right, is a sort of like where the passage is from, and you're going to get sometimes a little bit of background explaining the context of the passage and what type of people it might have been written for. This is something that you should browse very quickly because what you're primarily interested in is the passage. So remember, what you would do here is you're not going to read every word. You're looking for main ideas. So in passage 1, management objectives will differ substantially among species and thus influence habitat monitoring objectives. Oh, okay. And so you can keep reading, but basically, right, the objectives for monitoring species change based on like who's managing that particular reserve or survey or whatever. So I can kind of go ahead for now. The process of identifying monitoring priorities begins with a review of pertinent laws, regulations, policies. I got it. They have to review laws. Recovery plans for threatened or endangered species require that cooperating agencies monitor population parameters. I see. So basically, like, you need to follow laws and agencies need to work together. And notice, I'm not any sentence that's really heavy on details, like this last one here about memoranda of understanding within the state. This process would continue. Regional and forest management objectives also influence whether habitat is monitored for an emphasis species. So it isn't just whoever's like managing that particular or monitoring that particular species. You also need to be concerned with region and forest management. Conversely, an emphasis species associated with a habitat that is not likely to be influenced by planned management actions may be a poor candidate. Let me go to the next slide. For the objective of indirectly monitoring populations, it may be an acceptable approach under a limited range of management circumstances. I'm not sure what that meant, so let's pretend. Species that are difficult to detect and difficult to monitor are good habitats for habitat monitoring if strong habitat relationships have been documented. So, harder to monitor species may be worth monitoring in the right conditions. And again, I want everyone to feel very, very clear here. We don't have a great understanding of the passage, but we do know the basic point of each paragraph. Why does that matter? Let me skip ahead and sort of just clear this markup. Look at the question. The author's main purpose in this excerpt is to, well, what is the author doing? The author is going through a bunch of monitoring criteria. Whether something is the right species to monitor depends on sort of the objectives of management, that you also need to be wary of following laws and working with other agencies, that you need to keep in mind what the management of the region and the forest is like, and that certain species that might be difficult to monitor can be monitored under certain conditions. So just moving a little bit more quickly here, because I want to keep an eye on our clock. Whoops, sorry. Just using the process of elimination a little bit, encourage professionals to adopt a monitoring approach that is similar to the Forestry Service's approach. No, the Forestry Service is only mentioned in one just moment, right? B, influence habitat monitoring professionals to monitor populations too. They actually do talk about populations, so we'll keep that. C, concentrate wildlife monitoring efforts on bird populations. We read a bunch of stuff, and this was more about monitoring in general and not birds. Educate readers about how to monitor wildlife habitats. The thing here is that nothing in what we read was about telling readers to get involved. And then E, direct resources towards protecting endangered species. And if we sort of look at this, right? It's, yes, a lot of this focus is on how we might properly monitor and protect endangered species. So the reason B is out here is only because that populations part is only in the very final paragraph. Everything that we read is the different things we need to keep in mind to use resources properly. And I can at least eliminate a bunch of these from the main ideas that I have. So there's some more examples here on these passages, but I just wanted to show the sort of general gist. And let me, just looking at our time, let me take a moment and move ahead to a little bit of the essay part of it, just because that could easily be a worthwhile question. That usually has even more stress than the multiple choice does. So let's talk about what we recommend as a good guideline for writing your essays. First, make sure you understand the prompt. Language and lit prompts are extremely specific. We've seen a lot of great essays that score poorly simply because they don't actually address the prompt. They talk about something related to the argument in the question, but not the argument in the question itself. Next, take a position. You cannot write neutrally about the topic. It is very important that you have an argument. And remember, an argument is something that people can disagree with. So, if you say, for instance, it's generally colder in Alaska than in Florida, that is not an argument because that factually, that statement is true. It can't really be argued against. I need to make sure that you need to make sure you write something where someone could say, no, I disagree for these reasons. That's an argument. Third, your essay must be well organized. Each of the scoring rubrics for all 6 essays, depending on which exam you're doing, has a point and sometimes 2 points available strictly on organization. You need to write in a thesis, body paragraph, conclusion structure, always tying back each body paragraph to your thesis. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. So on AP English Lang, just looking at these a little bit more deeply, your synthesis essay is going to give you a scenario, and it will ask you to write a response using at least 3 of the 6 or 7 accompanying sources. Rhetorical analysis will ask you to break down the techniques an author used to make a point and discuss how those techniques contributed. And the argument essay gives you a claim or assertion in the prompt and asks you to argue a position based on that from your own knowledge, experience, or reading. The argument essay will be most similar to a lot of the essays you've written in high school English class. So, a great rule for organizing your points then. Paragraph 1 should always have an introductory sentence that serves as a hook. That it should say, this is going to be a great essay within a pile of other boring essays the reader is reading. So for instance, if you got that question I went before about a character interacting with hierarchical structure, opening your paragraph with something like challenging, living in the machine is easy, fighting against it is hard. And then going into your example or what you believe about characters and hierarchical structures. The very next thing then is the thesis you intend to argue. Remember, it's got to be debatable, but it's also got to be specific so that you can cover it in a short essay. You should mention the pieces of evidence you're going to use. So effectively, you should preview what the point of each body paragraph is going to be. And then the last sentence should be a transition out. A good introduction can literally be 4 sentences with 1 sentence each accomplishing one of these bullet points each. In a body paragraph, you should not just give the details of your evidence, like which the book you're using an example from, but you need to take a couple of sentences to explain why it supports your thesis. You will lose a point on the essay immediately if you explain a character fighting against the hierarchy, but you don't actually say, this demonstrates that in whatever your argument was. You can make one of your body paragraphs, usually the third one, right? A counter argument and shoot it down. Or you could even admit that there are exceptions to your argument. Either one of these makes the argument more complex. A good conclusion doesn't just restate a thesis. It should make a stronger version of the thesis and remind the reader what your thesis was in the first place. Very, very important that you have a conclusion because it speaks to organization all the time. Now, On AP English Lit, please make sure to go back to all those questions that you have prepared. 3 examples for the literary argument. Try to source 2 books from different eras and a play. Try to have a nice variety so that you're going to be able to use at least one of them as the backbone for that literary argument essay. This is some of the only outside knowledge you've got to come into these exams with. Second, when you're analyzing text, so that's a prose fiction and a poem, you want to look for a main line of reasoning and a rhetorical device. I'm going to give you a quick example of that. Let's say that the author continues to use the word we. They repeat the word we in their poem over and over. Why might an author do that? An author might do that to make an appeal to emotion. You guys might know that as pathos. Trying to show unity between the author and the reader. So one of your body paragraphs in an analytical essay might say, the author makes use of repetition in order to demonstrate an emotional appeal to the reader's sense of unity. And then you would offer examples from the passage, and you would you would explain how those examples accomplish the author's goal. So when readers hear this we, they feel a call to action to stand by the narrator, making it more likely that he's won them over to his side. You should find 3 main lines of reasoning when you're analyzing a prose or a poem, and the body paragraph should each focus on 1 line of reasoning. Lastly, make sure your essay is organized. It's the same thing as we discussed before. So on AP Lit, here are your 3 essays. We've kind of spoken about them already. And understand that for both of these tests, you have roughly 40 minutes per essay on average. AP Lang just has the extra 15-minute reading period. So a good backup that kind of works for both tests. Take on average 40 minutes per essay. On both exams, you can choose the essay you want to write first. So you should choose with the one that you're going to do the strongest job on. Make sure you catch all of the keywords of the prompt, because all of those need to be directly used and responded to. If it's one of the analytical essays, skim the passage, understanding the main idea of each paragraph and identifying quotes that you're going to want to use in your analysis. We'll quickly teach you in a moment something called the idea machine to plan your first paragraph. Make sure that in the body paragraphs, you're supporting and developing one of the 3 main points you made in the intro. Always have a solid conclusion and repeat this. So the idea machine on this next slide is by asking what is the meaning of the work, which is literally what was the work's main point and what emotions were involved, come out from that work, and then asking, how does the author get the meaning across? What imagery do they use? What words and phrases do they use? Do they mention the opposition? These 2 questions, what does the work mean? So what is its topic plus any attitudes it has? And how does the author get that meaning across? These 2 things are always going to help you form an argument. Because if you're being asked to analyze a prose and you can identify through the idea machine that the topic was standing up against a corrupt government, and the emotions are emotions of unity and pride versus fear and oppression, and you can say that he gets that across through repetition, through factual data, through analogy, then your thesis is written. You can say in this work, this author uses these devices to get people to stand up against the tyrannical government. And then you are off and running with giving your lines of reasoning as to how he does that. So the idea machine is a tool for creating arguments. Understand that anyone who can write a good essay can get an AP essay that scores 4 or higher, which will get you college credit basically anywhere. Remember, you are not really going to be fact checked here. Because it's interpretation and opinion. As long as you can support your interpretation with evidence, you're right. So understand too, you are not being judged on writing a perfect essay in 40 minutes. Write a great first paragraph, and then even if the remaining paragraphs aren't as flawless, as long as they connect to that first one, you're going to be fine. So the best way to succeed on these exams is by knowing the content on the exam, but these are still standardized tests. And a lot of what we covered tonight is how to beat standardized tests. So by sort of learning not just what's on the exam, but understanding how some of these things are built, understanding how to use POE, how you read the passage once, more of an overview, and you only read specific parts of it when the questions call for it, how you come into each paragraph with a plan to use the ideal machine to generate an argument. All of these things are incredibly powerful skills that you can work on more through prep, whether that's working with a company like Princeton Review, purchasing a prep book, attending one of our AP Cram courses. So, since we have a few minutes here, and I know that I made some of these points quickly to make sure you guys saw everything, would love to open up the floor since we've got some time for questions. So if you have any type of question, feel free to put it right in the Q&A, and we can take a few minutes here to dig a little bit more deeply into the format structure of these exams, things you might need to know. You can fire away, and Anna and I are here to answer as many questions as you have. Okay, so I see in chat. If you do not have any questions, Anna and I would like to thank everyone for their time and attendance tonight. And I see Anna's come on. So, Anna, if you have any comments to close us out?
Yeah, absolutely. Ken, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and joining us this evening. I know that this is something that many attendees have been looking forward to for quite some time. So thank you again so generously for offering your time. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. So for those of you joining us via the recording, thank you for watching.